Understand this before anything else. There is a moment, quiet and unannounced, when everything changes. Not because the world shifted, not because circumstances rearranged themselves out of kindness, but because something inside of you finally agreed to believe what your eyes had not yet seen. That moment is available to you right now. It has always been available to you. And the secret, the one thing that so many spend a lifetime searching for, in books, in temples, in teachers, in far off places, is so simple that the mind almost refuses to accept it. The secret is to assume it is already yours. Think about this for a moment. Not I will have it, not I hope to have it, not I am working toward it, but it is already yours, already accomplished, already finished in the unseen. This is not a technique you perform once and forget. This is a state you enter and live from. It is the difference between standing outside a locked door, knocking and pleading, and realizing you have held the key in your hand the entire time, simply forgetting to turn it. The truth is, most people spend their entire lives negotiating with reality instead of commanding it from within. They look at their bank account and call it truth. They look at their loneliness and call it truth. They look at their tired body, their stalled career, their fractured relationships, and they call all of it truth, when really it is only the outer shadow of an inner belief that has not yet been revised. You have been taught to believe that the outer world is the cause and your inner world is the effect, but it is the reverse. It has always been the reverse. Your consciousness is the only reality. Everything else, every circumstance, every condition, every person who has wronged you, every dream that seems far away, is simply the reflection of what has been assumed, consciously or unconsciously, within. Let that sink into your spirit. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are the unrecognized author of them. And once you understand this, once it actually settles into the marrow of your being and not just the surface of your intellect, you will never again ask the world to change before you change. You will not wait for proof before you believe. You will believe first, and the proof, the evidence, the manifestation, the miracle will arrange itself accordingly, because that is the law. That has always been the law. Consider this. Long before there was ever a physical world you could touch, there was an idea. Every building you have ever stood inside began as a thought in the mind of an architect who saw it complete before a single brick was laid. Every relationship you have ever cherished began as a feeling of connection before words were exchanged. Every success you have ever tasted began as an inner conviction that arrived quietly, long before the world offered its applause. This is not a metaphor. This is the mechanism of creation itself. Imagination is not decoration for the mind. Imagination is the very workshop of God, operating through you, as you, in every waking and sleeping moment of your existence. Neville Goddard, who understood this truth as few ever have, taught that imagination creates reality. Not that imagination reflects reality, not that imagination anticipates reality, but that imagination creates it, actively, continuously, whether you are aware of this creative power or not. You are always imagining. You are always assuming something. The question is never whether you are using this power. You are using it in every single moment, awake or asleep. The only question is whether you are using it consciously, deliberately, and in alignment with what you truly desire, or whether you are using it carelessly, allowing fear, doubt, and old wounds to script your future without your permission. Feel this deeply. Every time you have said, "I am always broke," you were not describing a condition. You were issuing a command to the deepest layer of your mind, and that layer, faithful and obedient, went to work arranging your outer world to match your inner world. Every time you have said, "Nobody ever stays," you were not observing a pattern, you were assuming a future, and the future, patient and impartial, waited for your permission before delivering exactly what you had decided was true. The subconscious mind does not judge your assumptions. It does not ask whether they are good for you or destructive to you. It simply says yes. It says yes to everything you feel as true, everything you assume without question, everything you have quietly decided about who you are and what you deserve. This is why so many people, sincere and hardworking, remain stuck in the same patterns for years. They pray for change with their lips, while assuming lack with their hearts. And the heart, not the lips, is what shapes destiny. Now allow yourself to see this from a higher place. If your assumptions are creating your circumstances, then you are far more powerful than you have ever allowed yourself to believe. You are not waiting for God to bless you from somewhere far away in the sky. You are not waiting for luck to finally notice you. The kingdom of God, as it was written, is within you, not beside you, not above you, within you. This means the power to create, to heal, to transform, to become. That power was never outside of yourself. It was placed within you at the very beginning, dormant perhaps, unused perhaps, but never absent. You carry divinity the way the ocean carries salt, not as an addition, but as its very nature. This is why the secret is not to beg for what you want. It is to assume it is already yours. Begging keeps you in a state of lack, reinforcing the very absence you are trying to escape. Assumption places you on the other side of the wish fulfilled, standing in the reality of having rather than the anxiety of wanting. There is an enormous difference between the energy of wanting and the energy of having, and your subconscious mind can feel that difference even when your conscious mind cannot fully articulate it. Wanting says, I do not have this, and I am afraid I never will. Having says, this is already mine, and I move through the world from that quiet certainty. One of these states attracts more of the same lack. The other state attracts the very fulfillment you have already claimed as your identity. Understand this. When the Bible speaks of faith, it is not asking you to believe in something distant, something you cannot access, something reserved only for saints and prophets. Faith, in its truest and most practical sense, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Notice that word substance, not fantasy, not wishful thinking, substance. Faith is not pretending something is true while secretly knowing it is not. Faith is knowing something is true in the unseen before it has become visible in the seen. Because you understand that the unseen realm of consciousness is the actual realm of cause, and the seen realm of matter is merely the realm of effect. When you truly grasp this, prayer stops being a desperate plea into the void and becomes instead a quiet, confident conversation with your own creative power, thanking God, thanking your own I am presence for what has already been given, even before the outer evidence arrives. Let this settle within you. You are not asking a distant deity to intervene on your behalf as though you are a beggar outside a palace gate. You are the palace. You are the gate. You are the one who decides what enters and what does not. Your imagination is the very throne room in which decrees are made, and what you decree there, felt as real, assumed as true, held with quiet, unwavering conviction, must, by spiritual law as certain as gravity, express itself in your outer experience. This is not superstition. This is not blind hope. This is the mechanics of consciousness, the very framework upon which reality itself operates. Now notice what happens when you begin to live from this understanding rather than merely think about it. You stop reacting to the world as though it holds power over you. You stop scanning your bank statement with dread because you already know, deep within, that abundance is your true nature and the number on the page is only a temporary echo of an old assumption that is now being revised. You stop checking your phone anxiously for a reply because you already feel, in your imagination, the warmth of connection, the security of being loved, the peace of knowing you are never actually alone. This shift does not happen through willpower, it happens through identity. You are not trying harder, you are becoming someone new, someone for whom these outcomes are simply natural, ordinary, expected. This is why the ancient teaching says you must be born again. Not born again in the sense of a single emotional event at an altar, though that experience has its place, but born again in the deeper sense of continuously dying to the old self-concept and continuously rising into a new one. The old self believed in lack, the new self knows abundance. The old self believed love was scarce and had to be chased. The new self knows love is the very substance of being and flows toward whoever assumes it is already present. The old self believed the body was fragile and fated to decline. The new self knows the body is a faithful servant of the mind, responding to the images and feelings that are repeatedly impressed upon it. This rebirth is not a one-time event. It is a daily, sometimes hourly choice to die to the old assumption and rise into the new one, again and again, until the new self is no longer an aspiration, but simply who you are. Imagine for a moment that you already have everything you have been striving for. Not someday, not eventually. Right now, in this very moment, allow yourself to feel what it would be like if the thing you desire most had already arrived. Feel the relief in your chest. Feel the ease in your shoulders. Feel the quiet smile that comes not from excitement, but from settled peace. The peace of someone who is no longer chasing because they already have. Stay there for a moment. Do not rush past this. This feeling, this exact feeling you are touching right now, is the raw material of your future. It is not imagination in the sense of make-believe. It is imagination in the sense of the most powerful faculty you possess. Quietly recording this assumed state and beginning even now to weave it into the fabric of your circumstances. You must realize that the outer world always lags behind the inner world. This is why so many give up right before their breakthrough. They assume a new state for a few days, notice no immediate change, and conclude the technique does not work, returning to their old complaints and old identities, which of course reinforces the old results. But the law was never broken. The law was simply operating on its own timeline, gathering the necessary people, circumstances, and conditions behind the scenes, the way a seed gathers strength beneath the soil long before a single green shoot breaks the surface. Divine timing is not a delay, it is a gestation. And your role during this unseen gestation period is not to dig up the seed every day to check on its progress. Your role is to remain faithful to the assumption, watering it daily with the feeling of already having, and trusting that what has been impressed upon consciousness with sincerity and persistence must, in its own perfect timing, come to pass. The truth is, this is where most people falter, not because the law fails them, but because they abandon the assumption too soon, distracted by the shouting of appearances. Appearances are loud, appearances are convincing, appearances show up in your mailbox as bills, in your mirror as fatigue, in your relationships as silence where you long for connection. But appearances are not truth. Appearances are simply the residue of past assumptions still working their way out of manifestation. You are not obligated to believe what your eyes currently show you. You are invited instead to believe what your heart has decided is already true, and to let that inner conviction outlast the temporary noise of the outer world. This is why the scriptures say we walk by faith and not by sight. Sight shows you what has already been created. Faith shows you what is currently being created, in the unseen womb of your own consciousness, waiting to be born into form. If you walk by sight alone, you will only ever repeat your past, because sight has no access to anything beyond what already exists. But if you walk by faith, you walk ahead of your circumstances, decreeing a thing before it is established, and then watching, often with quiet astonishment, as the outer world rearranges itself to catch up with the inner conviction you refuse to abandon. Consider the story of a man who wanted a particular position at his company, a role that seemed, by every outer measure, entirely out of reach. He was not the most qualified. He did not have the connections. Logic offered him no evidence to support his hope. But he began, quietly and without telling anyone, to assume the feeling of already having received the promotion. He did not fantasize about it as a distant fantasy. He inhabited it. He imagined the congratulations from colleagues, the new title on his email signature, the quiet satisfaction of walking into that office as though it already belonged to him. He did this not once, but nightly, drifting to sleep in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, refusing to argue with his own imagination, refusing to let the day's disappointments talk him out of his inner conviction. Weeks later, through a sequence of events that appeared, on the surface, to be nothing more than coincidence, a sudden resignation, a reorganization, a decision-maker who had never previously noticed him, the position became his. Was it coincidence? Or was it the outer world simply obeying the inner decree that had already been settled, weeks before, in the quiet privacy of his own imagination? This is not a rare exception. This is the pattern, repeating itself endlessly throughout history, throughout scripture, throughout the quiet, unrecorded lives of ordinary people who stumbled, whether consciously or not, upon this law. The Bible is not merely a historical religious text. It is, when read with awakened eyes, a psychological drama, a detailed manual describing the movements of consciousness, disguised in the language of kings, prophets, and miracles, so that the truth could be preserved and passed down through generations who were not yet ready to understand it in plain psychological terms. When it is written that Christ was born in you, this is not solely a historical claim about a single event 2000 years ago. It is a present, ongoing invitation. Christ, in this deeper reading, represents your own awakened imagination, the divine creative power within you, waiting to be born into conscious use, rather than left dormant, unrecognized, buried beneath years of limiting belief. You must realize that when you assume a new state, you are not lying to yourself. You are not engaging in delusion. You are aligning yourself with a deeper truth than the temporary, shifting truth of current appearances. There is the truth of what currently exists, and there is the truth of what your divine imagination has decreed will exist. Both are real, but only one of them is permanent, because appearances are always changing, always temporary, always the effect of some prior cause, while the creative power within you is the eternal cause behind every effect that has ever appeared or ever will appear. When you assume, you are not fighting reality. You are stepping into your rightful place as the one who authors reality, rather than the one who merely reacts to it. This is why the secret is to assume it is already yours, not to hope it might one day be yours, not to work desperately for it while secretly doubting it will ever arrive, but to assume it, fully, calmly, repeatedly, until the assumption feels more real to you than the current circumstances that seem to contradict it. This calm certainty is not arrogance. It is not disconnection from reality. It is, in truth, a deeper connection to a more permanent reality than the temporary one that most people mistake for the only truth available. Let this settle within you fully. The moment you assume a thing is already yours, you begin to notice the world responding differently to you. This is not because the world has changed. It is because you have changed. And the world, as it always does, is simply reflecting back to you the new person you have become. People treat you differently when you no longer beg for their approval because you no longer need it, you already feel whole. Opportunities seem to appear more readily when you no longer chase them desperately because desperation itself is an assumption of lack, and lack always attracts more lack. But when you relax into the assumed state of already having, of already being, of already belonging, the very desperation that once repelled what you wanted quietly dissolves, and in its place arrives a magnetic calm that draws circumstances toward you rather than pushing them away. This is why self-concept is so central to this entire teaching. Your self-concept, the story you carry about who you are, what you deserve, what is possible for you, is the lens through which every experience is filtered. Two people can walk through the exact same city, encounter the exact same opportunities, meet the exact same strangers, and yet live entirely different lives, because one carries a self-concept of worthiness and possibility, while the other carries a self-concept of limitation and unworthiness. The city did not change, the opportunities did not change, only the lens changed, and through that lens, two entirely different realities were experienced, interpreted, and ultimately created. This is why changing your circumstances without first changing your self-concept is like repainting a house whose foundation is cracked. The paint may look fresh for a while, but the underlying structure eventually reveals itself again, pulling the surface back toward its original condition. You are not being asked to change your circumstances directly, you are being asked to change your self-concept, and from that new inner ground, entirely new circumstances will grow naturally, the way a different soil produces a different harvest, without the farmer needing to force each individual seed into bloom. Revise your self-concept and your entire life reorganizes around this new foundation, not overnight in most cases, but inevitably, faithfully, according to the same law that has governed consciousness since the beginning of time. Notice what happens when you stop asking, how will this happen, and instead simply rest in the feeling that it has already happened. The how is not your responsibility. The how belongs to a wisdom far greater than your conscious mind could ever orchestrate. A wisdom that operates behind the scenes, coordinating people you have never met, circumstances you could never have planned, timing you could never have predicted, all converging toward the fulfillment of what you have assumed. Your only responsibility, the only labor required of you, is to remain faithful to the inner conviction, to refuse to let go of the assumed state simply because the outer world has not yet caught up to reflect it. This faithfulness, this persistence in believing what is not yet seen, is what Scripture calls faith, and it is the very substance from which every miracle you have ever witnessed, in your own life or in the lives of others, was ultimately formed. The truth is, most people give away their power moment by moment without even realizing it. They give it away every time they complain about their circumstances instead of revising their assumption about those circumstances. They give it away every time they say, that's just how things are for me, sealing their current condition as though it were an unchangeable law of the universe, rather than a temporary result of a belief that can at any moment be revised. They give it away every time they scroll through the lives of others, comparing their own unfinished story to someone else's highlight reel, and in doing so, plant seeds of scarcity and comparison instead of seeds of self-acceptance and inner authority. Every one of these moments is a fork in the road, a small decision about which reality you are agreeing to inhabit. And the extraordinary thing is, you have the power in every single one of these moments to choose differently. This is why inner authority is so essential to this entire journey. Inner authority means you no longer outsource your sense of reality to outer conditions. You no longer wait for the bank statement to tell you whether you are abundant. You no longer wait for another person's affection to tell you whether you are worthy of love. You no longer wait for a diagnosis, a rejection letter, a difficult season to tell you what is ultimately possible for your life. You reclaim the authority that was always yours, the authority to decide from within what is true for you, and then to hold that decision with such quiet, unwavering conviction that the outer world, resistant at first perhaps, eventually has no choice but to rearrange itself around your new inner decree. Understand this. The world you currently see is not a fixed, objective, unchangeable place. It is, in the deepest sense, a mirror, and mirrors do not argue with what stands before them. They simply reflect. If you stand before the mirror of life with an assumption of poverty, the mirror reflects poverty back to you, not out of cruelty, but out of faithful obedience to the law of reflection. If you stand before that same mirror with an assumption of abundance, held not as wishful thinking, but as settled conviction, the mirror, just as faithfully, just as obediently, reflects abundance back to you. The mirror never initiates, it only responds. And you, whether you have realized it until now or not, have always been standing before it, shaping its reflection with every assumption you have ever held about yourself and your life. This is why blame is ultimately such an exhausting and unproductive use of your creative power. To blame another person, a circumstance, a season of bad luck for your current condition is to hand your creative authority over to something outside of yourself, effectively declaring that you are powerless, that someone else holds the pen to your story. But you were never powerless. You have always held the pen. The circumstances you observe, however painful, however unjust they may feel, were shaped by the accumulation of assumptions, some conscious, many unconscious, planted over years, sometimes over an entire lifetime. This is not said to shame you for your current circumstances, but to liberate you from them. Because if you created them, even unconsciously, then you also hold the power to create something entirely different, beginning the moment you choose to assume it. Feel this deeply. This is not about denying real pain, real loss, real difficulty. Life on this earth includes genuine struggle, and no spiritual teaching should ever ask you to pretend that pain does not exist or that grief is somehow a mistake to be argued away. But even within genuine struggle, there remains a deeper truth available to you. That your response to what has happened, your interpretation of what it means about your future, your assumption about what comes next, remains entirely within your own creative authority. Two people can experience the exact same loss and emerge into entirely different futures, not because one suffered less, but because one allowed the loss to define a permanent identity of brokenness, while the other, in time, revised their assumption, allowing the pain to become part of their story without becoming the entire story. This is the deepest form of spiritual maturity. Not the absence of hardship, but the refusal to let hardship have the final word over your imagination. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to feel deeply, fully, honestly, and in that same breath, you are also allowed, whenever you are ready, to begin assuming a different future. Not by bypassing the pain, but by moving through it with the quiet trust that your consciousness, aligned with the divine within you, is capable of authoring a new chapter, regardless of how the previous one ended. Allow yourself to see this bigger picture now. Every great figure in scripture who accomplished what seemed impossible did so not through outer strength alone, but through an inner conviction that preceded and ultimately produced the outer victory. Before the walls fell, there was a decree of faith. Before the sea parted, there was a step taken in the assumption of safety on the other side. Before the impossible birth, there was an angelic assurance received and believed, not merely heard and doubted. Every outer miracle recorded in scripture was preceded by an inner shift, an assumption held with such complete conviction that outer reality had no choice but to conform to it. This pattern has never changed. It is operating in your life right now, in this very moment, whether you are aware of it or not. This is why the discipline of controlling your inner conversations is so vital to this entire spiritual practice. Notice, throughout your day, the silent conversations you carry on within your own mind, the imagined arguments you rehearse with people who have hurt you, the anxious rehearsals of conversations that have not yet happened, the mental replaying of past failures as though they define your permanent capability. These inner conversations are not neutral. They are, quite literally, prayers, whether you intended them as such or not, and your subconscious mind, faithful and impartial, is recording them, weaving them into the fabric of your coming experience. This is why Neville Goddard placed such enormous emphasis on controlling the inner conversation, revising the day's disappointments before sleep, replaying not what actually happened, but what you wished had happened, training the imagination to dwell not on grievance, but on the desired outcome, until this becomes the dominant, habitual assumption from which your life is unconsciously scripted. Consider this practice now, gently, without pressure. Tonight, before sleep, instead of replaying the frustrations of your day, choose one moment that did not go as you wished, and simply imagine it differently. Not as a fantasy disconnected from your life, but as a conscious act of revision, changing the inner record so that it aligns with the life you are choosing to create, rather than the life you are unconsciously repeating. This single practice done consistently quietly reshapes the subconscious mind over time, retraining it to expect good rather than expecting disappointment, retraining it to assume abundance rather than assuming lack, retraining it, ultimately, to reflect back to you the very life you have always longed to live. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not being punished by some far-off deity who withholds blessings arbitrarily. You are, in this very moment, a creative being, made in the image and likeness of the very source that spoke worlds into existence through nothing more than the spoken word, the assumed reality, the imagined truth held as fact. That same creative power lives within you now, not diminished, not distant, not reserved for a chosen few, but fully present, fully available, waiting only for your recognition and your willing, deliberate use. This is why the secret is not complicated, though it is often resisted, precisely because it places the entire responsibility and the entire power back into your own hands. It is far easier in the short term to believe that your life is shaped by luck, by other people, by circumstances beyond your control, because this belief, though painful, absolves you of the responsibility to change. But the moment you accept the deeper truth that you are the one assuming your reality into being, moment by moment, day by day, you can no longer comfortably remain a passive victim of your own life. You are invited instead into your rightful role as the deliberate creator of your experience, a role that requires not effort in the way the world typically defines effort, but a quiet, consistent, faithful discipline of the imagination. Feel this deeply, one final time, before you carry this truth forward into your life. Whatever you desire, a healed relationship, a flourishing career, a body restored to vibrant health, a peace that no longer depends on outer conditions, that thing is not far from you. It is not waiting somewhere in a distant future that must be earned through years of struggle. It is available to you the instant you shift your assumption, the instant you choose to live inwardly as though it is already accomplished. The outer world will take whatever time it requires to catch up to this inner shift, and that timing is not yours to control or worry over. Your only task, your sacred and singular task, is to remain faithful to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, to walk through your days as the version of yourself who already has what they once only longed for, and to trust, with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who understands the law rather than merely hoping it might be true, that what has been assumed within must, in its appointed time, be revealed without. You are not waiting for life to change, life is waiting for you to decide. And in this very moment, you have already begun.